The sound of breaking crystal echoed through Lumiere, Beverly Hills' most exclusive restaurant. 7-year-old Lucas Santangelo threw a $300 wine glass against the marble floor. Tears ran down his face as he screamed words that made grown men in $1,000 suits back away in fear. But Nora Fitzgerald didn't move. She knelt beside the broken child of America's most dangerous man. Her gentle voice cut through his anger like a whisper in a storm. "I know your heart is hurting," she said softly. And for the first time in months, the little boy who scared nannies and bodyguards simply stopped. In that moment, surrounded by chaos and broken crystal pieces, something changed. The waitress, who was invisible to everyone else, had just seen what no one else could see, not a monster's son, but a broken little boy who just wanted someone to stay. The black Escalade pulled up to Lumiere's valet stand at exactly 7 p.m. Its dark windows reflected the golden California sunset. From the passenger seat, 7-year-old Lucas Santangelo pressed his small face against the glass, watching well-dressed couples disappear through the restaurant's shiny doors. "Your father will meet you inside, young master," said Tony, the bodyguard assigned to Lucas for the evening. His voice carried the same careful tone everyone used around the boy, part respect for his father's name, part fear of his unpredictable temper. Lucas said nothing. At 7 years old, he had already learned that promises about his father were usually lies. Inside Lumiere, crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables covered in crisp white linens. The restaurant buzzed with the quiet conversations of Los Angeles's elite, movie producers, tech millionaires, and politicians who paid $500 per plate for the privilege of being seen here. Nora Fitzgerald balanced 3 plates on her left arm while refilling water glasses with practiced skill. At 24, she had been working at Lumiere for 8 months, long enough to become invisible to the wealthy customers who barely noticed her existence. She preferred it that way. Invisible meant safe, and safe meant she could keep sending money home to her grandmother in Boston. "Table 12 needs their wine," called Marcus, the head waiter, his French accent thick with annoyance. "And the Hendersons are asking about their appetizers again." Nora nodded, tucking a strand of auburn hair behind her ear. She had learned to move through this world like a ghost, efficient, silent, forgettable. It was a survival skill she had perfected over years of working multiple jobs to support herself and her sick grandmother. The restaurant's heavy doors opened, and Tony entered with a small figure beside him. Lucas Santangelo looked like any other wealthy child in his pressed navy blazer and tiny dress shoes. But Nora noticed the tension in his small shoulders, the way his dark eyes scanned the room with an alertness that seemed too old for his face. "Mr. Santangelo's table," Tony told the maitre d', who immediately straightened. Everyone in Los Angeles knew the Santangelo name, even if they pretended not to. "Of course, right this way," the maitre d' said, leading them to a corner table with a clear view of the entrance. It was Giovanni Santangelo's usual table, positioned carefully so he could see anyone coming or going. Lucas climbed into the oversized chair, his feet dangling above the floor. Tony checked his watch and frowned. "Your father should be here any minute. I'll wait by the door." But Nora, refilling water glasses at a nearby table, caught the flicker of doubt that crossed the little boy's face. She had seen that expression before, in her own mirror years ago, waiting for parents who worked too much and promised too little. 20 minutes passed, then 30. Lucas sat perfectly still, his small hands folded in his lap, watching the door with the patience of a child who had learned not to expect too much. Other diners began to notice the boy sitting alone, whispering behind their hands about the Santangelo Air dining solo. Nora approached the table carefully, her training fighting with an instinct she couldn't quite name. "Would you like something to drink while you wait?" she asked gently. Lucas looked up at her with eyes that seemed far too serious for a 7-year-old. "Chocolate milk," he said quietly. "If you have it." "I'll see what I can do," Nora smiled. And for just a moment, Lucas's stiff posture relaxed slightly. She returned with a tall glass of chocolate milk, complete with a striped straw and a small plate of cookies she had convinced the kitchen to spare. "The cookies are on the house," she said, setting them down carefully. "Thank you," Lucas said, his voice barely above a whisper. It was perhaps the first genuine kindness he had received all day. Another 20 minutes crawled by. The chocolate milk sat untouched, and the cookies remained on their plate. Lucas continued his watch, staring at the door with the desperate hope of a child who still believed his father might appear. At 8:15, Tony's phone buzzed. He answered with a sharp, "Yeah," then listened, his expression growing serious. He approached Lucas's table with obvious reluctance. "Young master," he said carefully, "your father has been delayed. Business emergency. He sends his apologies." The words hit Lucas like a physical blow. His small face crumpled for just a moment before he forced it back into careful blankness. But Nora, watching from across the room, saw the exact moment the little boy's heart broke. "I want to go home," Lucas said quietly. "Your father requested you finish your dinner first," Tony replied, clearly uncomfortable with the lie. "He's very sorry." That's when something inside Lucas snapped. The chocolate milk glass flew first, shattering against the wall in an explosion of brown liquid and crystal pieces. Then came the plate of cookies, followed by the silverware, each piece clattering to the floor with increasing violence. "I hate him!" Lucas screamed, his 7-year-old voice carrying across the suddenly silent restaurant. "He promised. He always promises." Diners turned to stare, some reaching for their phones to record the meltdown of the Mafia prince. Tony moved forward, but Lucas was beyond reason now, months of abandonment and confusion pouring out in a flood of anger and tears. He grabbed the tablecloth and yanked, sending water glasses, bread plates, and silverware crashing to the marble floor. The sound was deafening in the elegant space, and several guests began to leave, unwilling to witness the scene. "Nobody cares," Lucas sobbed, kicking at the fallen chairs. "Mommy left and Daddy doesn't want me." The words cut through the chaos like a knife. This wasn't just a tantrum. This was the raw, desperate cry of a child who felt completely abandoned by the two people who were supposed to love him most. Tony tried to approach again, but Lucas threw a dinner roll at him, his small face red with tears and fury. The maitre hovered nearby, clearly torn between protecting his restaurant and avoiding the wrath of Giovanni Santangelo. And then, through the chaos, Nora moved. She didn't rush or shout commands. She simply walked calmly through the mess, her soft-soled shoes crunching quietly on broken glass. She knelt down about 3 feet away from Lucas, close enough to reach him, but far enough to give him space. "I know your heart is hurting," she said softly, her voice somehow carrying over his sobs. Lucas froze mid-throw, a breadstick still clutched in his small fist. He stared at her through tear-blurred eyes, as if he couldn't quite believe someone had actually spoken to him instead of about him. "Sometimes when our hearts hurt really bad," Nora continued in the same gentle tone, "we want to break things because we feel broken inside." Lucas's breathing began to slow, his chest still heaving with leftover sobs. The breadstick fell from his fingers. "But you know what I learned?" Nora asked, settling more comfortably on the floor among the broken dishes. "Breaking things doesn't fix the hurt. It just makes more broken pieces." "My daddy doesn't love me," Lucas whispered, the words barely audible. "Oh, sweetheart," Nora said, her heart breaking for this small lost boy. "Sometimes grown-ups are really bad at showing love. That doesn't mean they don't feel it." Lucas looked at her with those two old eyes, searching her face for lies. But Nora's expression was open and honest, free of the careful fear that colored everyone else's interactions with him. "Will you help me clean this up?" she asked gently. "Together." For a long moment, Lucas just stared at her. Then slowly he nodded. As they began picking up the larger pieces of broken dishes, neither of them noticed the figure who had appeared in the restaurant's doorway. Giovanni Santangelo, still in his business suit, watching his son kneel on the floor beside a waitress who had done what no one else could do. She had seen Lucas, not as the dangerous heir to a criminal empire, but simply as a little boy who needed someone to care. Gio Santangelo stood in the doorway of Lumiere, his presence immediately changing the atmosphere in the restaurant. At 42, he commanded attention without effort, 6 feet of controlled power in a perfectly tailored Armani suit, his dark hair touched with silver at the temples, and eyes that could freeze blood or warm hearts depending on his mood. Tonight those eyes were fixed on his son, who was carefully placing broken pieces of china into Nora's outstretched hands. The other diners recognized him immediately. Conversations died mid-sentence, and several guests suddenly found urgent reasons to leave. Giovanni Santangelo wasn't just wealthy, he was dangerous. The kind of man whose name appeared in whispered conversations and FBI files. But right now, watching his 7-year-old son work alongside a young waitress to clean up the destruction he had caused, Gio felt something he rarely experienced: uncertainty. "Daddy!" Lucas looked up from where he knelt on the floor, his small face still streaked with tears. The hope in his voice was heartbreaking, as if he couldn't quite believe his father had actually come. Joe's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The scene before him was a stark reminder of his failures as a father, and Giovanni Santangelo was not a man used to failure. "Lucas," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "What happened here?" Nora rose gracefully from the floor, still holding pieces of broken glass. She could feel the shift in the room's energy, the way everyone seemed to hold their breath in the presence of this man. But when she looked at him, she saw something others missed: the way his hands clenched slightly at his sides, the almost invisible tension around his eyes when he looked at his son. "It was an accident," she said quietly, stepping slightly closer to Lucas in an unconsciously protective gesture. Joe's gaze shifted to her for the first time, really seeing her. Auburn hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, green eyes that met his without flinching, and a quiet strength that reminded him of someone he tried not to think about. She was beautiful in an understated way that had nothing to do with the artificial perfection he was used to seeing in his world. "An accident," he repeated, his tone unreadable. "Sometimes accidents happen when we're feeling big emotions," Nora continued, her hand resting gently on Lucas's shoulder. Lucas was just having a hard time. The simple honesty in her words hit Gio harder than he expected. When was the last time someone had spoken to him without fear or calculation? When was the last time someone had defended his son instead of just managing him? "I see," Gio said slowly. He looked around at the mess: overturned chairs, broken dishes, chocolate milk staining the white tablecloth. The damage was significant, but not permanent, unlike other things in his life. Tony approached cautiously. "Boss, I tried to—" "It's fine, Tony," Gio cut him off, his eyes never leaving Lucas. "Wait in the car." As Tony retreated, Gio moved closer to his son. Lucas instinctively stepped back, bumping into Nora's legs. She steadied him with gentle hands, and Gio noticed how naturally the boy leaned into her touch. "Are you hurt?" Gio asked, crouching down to Lucas's eye level. It was a simple question, but loaded with meaning neither of them was ready to address. Lucas shook his head, but his lower lip trembled slightly. "I'm sorry, Daddy. I didn't mean to break everything." The words cut through Joe's chest like a blade. His son was apologizing for having emotions, for reacting like any 7-year-old would when abandoned and disappointed. It was exactly what Gio himself had learned to do at that age: apologize for feeling anything at all. "You don't need to apologize," Gio said quietly, and Nora was surprised by the gentleness in his voice. "I should have been here." "You're here now," Lucas said hopefully. And Joe's expression tightened with something that looked like pain. "Yes," Gio agreed, though they both knew it wasn't enough. It was never enough. He stood, pulling out his phone to handle the practical matters: paying for damages, ensuring the restaurant's silence, managing the fallout. It was easier than dealing with the emotional wreckage that couldn't be fixed with money. "Mr. Santangelo," the maitre d' approached nervously. "Please don't worry about the damages. These things happen." "I'll pay for everything," Gio cut him off, his voice returning to its usual commanding tone. "And for any lost business tonight. I trust this incident won't become a topic of conversation." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. The maitre d' nodded quickly. "Of course, sir. Complete discretion." As Gio handled the business side of the disaster, Nora continued helping Lucas collect the smaller pieces of debris. She noticed how the little boy kept glancing at his father, as if afraid he might disappear again. "He came," Lucas whispered to her so quietly that only she could hear. "He actually came." He did, Nora agreed, her heart aching for this child who was so grateful for the bare minimum of parental attention. Miss, Joe's voice interrupted her thoughts. He was looking at her with an intensity that made her suddenly aware of how she must appear, kneeling on the floor in her simple black uniform, surrounded by the chaos his son had created. Fitzgerald, she supplied. Nora Fitzgerald. Miss Fitzgerald, he continued, his accent carrying just a hint of his Italian heritage. I want to thank you for helping Lucas. There was something in his tone that suggested he wasn't used to thanking people, especially not for showing basic human kindness to his child. Any child would need help in this situation, Nora said simply. Lucas is a good kid. He was just overwhelmed. Gio studied her face, looking for the calculation he was used to seeing, the angle, the agenda, the fear. But Nora's expression remained open and honest, focused entirely on Lucas's well-being rather than his father's reputation or wealth. Daddy, Lucas tugged on Joe's jacket. Can Nora eat dinner with us? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Gio looked down at his son, then at the young woman who had somehow accomplished what teams of nannies and child psychologists had failed to do. She had calmed Lucas down and made him feel heard. Miss Fitzgerald is working, Gio said carefully. Actually, came a voice from behind them. Marcus, the head waiter, had been watching the entire scene with growing understanding. Nora's shift ended 20 minutes ago. Nora shot him a surprised look, but Marcus just smiled slightly. He had children of his own, and he recognized something special when he saw it. Please, Lucas asked, looking up at Nora with hopeful eyes. I promise I won't break anything else. Nora glanced between father and son, seeing the complex emotions playing across both their faces. Gio looked like a man trapped between wanting to give his son everything and being terrified of letting anyone too close. Lucas looked like a little boy who had found something precious and was afraid it would be taken away. Nora began, then stopped. Every instinct told her to politely decline, to maintain the safe distance between her world and theirs. But looking at Lucas's hopeful face, she found herself nodding. Just for a little while. The smile that spread across Lucas's face was like sunshine breaking through storm clouds, and for just a moment, Nora could have sworn she saw something similar flicker across his father's carefully controlled expression. As the restaurant staff efficiently cleaned up the remaining mess and reset their table, Nora found herself sitting across from one of the most dangerous men in Los Angeles, sharing a meal with his 7-year-old son who desperately needed someone to see him as more than just a problem to be managed. She had no idea that this simple act of kindness would change all their lives forever. The newly reset table felt different now, less formal, more intimate. Lucas sat between his father and Nora, chattering away as if the earlier meltdown had never happened. For the first time in months, he seemed genuinely happy, and Gio found himself studying the young woman who had somehow worked this miracle. And then the goldfish jumped right out of the bowl. Lucas was telling Nora about his day at private school, his small hands gesturing excitedly. Mrs. Peterson screamed so loud that Mr. Jenkins came running from the next classroom. Nora laughed, a genuine sound that made Lucas beam with pride. What did you do? I caught him, Lucas announced proudly. I saved Freddy the fish. Mrs. Peterson said I was a hero. You were, Nora agreed, ruffling his dark hair. That was very brave of you. Gio watched this interaction with fascination. Lucas had been through 6 nannies in the past year, each one leaving after dealing with his increasingly difficult behavior. Yet here he was, animated and sweet, responding to Nora's attention like a flower turning toward sunlight. Miss Fitzgerald, Gio said, his voice cutting through Lucas's story. You're very good with children. Do you have any of your own? The question was casual, but Nora caught the underlying assessment in his tone. She set down her water glass carefully. No, I don't. But I have experience with kids. I used to help take care of my neighbor's children back in Boston. Boston, Gio repeated. You're far from home. Sometimes distance is necessary, Nora replied, and something in her tone suggested there was more to that story. Before Gio could probe further, Lucas tugged on Nora's sleeve. Do you want to see my drawing? He pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his jacket pocket. A crayon drawing that looked like it had been worked on extensively. It showed 3 stick figures standing in front of what might have been a house, though the proportions were distinctly 7-year-old. "This is me," Lucas pointed to the smallest figure. "And this is Daddy." The middle figure was notably larger and darker. "And this is," he trailed off, looking uncertain. "Who's the third person?" Nora asked gently. "I don't know yet," Lucas said quietly. "But I thought maybe it could be someone nice. Someone who stays." The words hit both adults like a physical blow. Joe's jaw tightened, and Nora felt her throat constrict with unexpected emotion. This little boy was literally drawing his wish for a family, for someone who wouldn't leave him. "It's a beautiful drawing," Nora managed, her voice slightly thick. "You're a very talented artist." Lucas beamed and carefully folded the paper back up. "I'm going to finish it when I figure out who the third person should be." The waiter appeared to take their order, and Gio found himself in the surreal position of ordering dinner for 3, something he hadn't done since Isabella left. He watched Nora help Lucas decide between the chicken and the fish, patiently explaining the differences and letting him make his own choice. "The chicken, please," Lucas announced to the waiter. "With extra vegetables, because Nora says they make you strong." "When did I say that?" Nora asked, smiling. "Just now, with your eyes," Lucas said matter-of-factly, and Nora laughed again. Gio found himself studying that laugh, the way it changed her entire face. She was beautiful, but it was more than that. There was something genuine about her, something real in a world where he was surrounded by people who told him what they thought he wanted to hear. "So, Miss Fitzgerald," he said as their appetizers arrived. "What brought you to Los Angeles?" Nora hesitated, cutting her salad carefully. "Opportunity, I suppose. Better job prospects than Boston." It was a non-answer, and they both knew it. But Gio recognized the deflection. He used similar tactics himself when people asked too many questions about his business. "And you work at Lumiere full-time?" "Among other places," Nora admitted. "I also work at a coffee shop in the mornings and do some freelance bookkeeping on weekends." 3 jobs? Joe's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's ambitious." "That's survival," Nora corrected quietly, then seemed to realize how that sounded. "I mean, I have responsibilities back home. My grandmother needs care, and," she trailed off, clearly uncomfortable with revealing too much personal information. "Your grandmother raised you?" Gio asked, his tone gentler now. Nora nodded. "After my parents died when I was 12. She's everything to me." Lucas looked up from his bread roll. "My mommy left," he announced matter-of-factly. "Daddy says she had to go away, but I think she just didn't want to live with us anymore." The silence that followed was deafening. Joe's face went carefully blank, and Nora could see the pain he was trying to hide. This was clearly not a topic they had discussed properly, and Lucas's casual acceptance of abandonment broke her heart. "Sometimes grown-ups have to make very difficult choices," Nora said carefully, glancing at Gio. "But that doesn't mean it's anyone's fault, especially not yours, Lucas." "That's what Daddy says too," Lucas replied, but there was doubt in his young voice. "But if she loved me, wouldn't she have stayed?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Joe's hands clenched slightly around his wineglass, and Nora could see him struggling with how to answer. "Love is complicated," Nora said gently. "Sometimes people love us but can't stay for reasons that have nothing to do with us. It doesn't make the love less real." It was a diplomatic answer, but Lucas seemed to consider it seriously. "Do you think she still loves me even though she's gone?" "I think," Nora said carefully, "that any mother would be lucky to have a son like you. You're kind and smart and brave. Those are the kinds of things that make people love you forever, no matter where they are." Lucas smiled at that, seemingly satisfied. But Gio was looking at Nora with an intensity that made her suddenly aware of how deeply she had just waded into their family's pain. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I didn't mean to overstep." "You didn't," Gio said, his voice rough. "You said exactly what he needed to hear." Their main courses arrived, and the conversation shifted to lighter topics. Lucas's school, his favorite movies, his opinions on various foods. Nora found herself relaxing despite the surreal nature of the situation. Lucas was charming and funny when he felt safe, and even Gio seemed to soften as the evening progressed. "Daddy," Lucas said as he finished his chicken, "can Nora come to our house sometime? I want to show her my room." Joe's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Lucas, Miss Fitzgerald has her own life, her own responsibilities." "But she could visit," Lucas persisted, "just to see my toys and maybe play a game." Nora felt the weight of both their gazes, Lucas's hopeful, Joe's unreadable. She was walking into dangerous territory and she knew it. Getting involved with this family, no matter how much Lucas needed stability, was asking for trouble. But looking at the little boy's eager face, she found herself weakening. "Maybe sometime," she said carefully, "if your father thinks it's appropriate." "Please, Daddy." Lucas turned his full attention to Gio. "She's nice and she doesn't get scared when I'm upset." Gio studied his son's face, seeing hope there that had been absent for months. Then he looked at Nora, this young woman who had somehow reached his child when no one else could. "We'll see," he said finally, and Lucas's face lit up as if he'd just been promised Christmas morning. As they finished dinner, Nora couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing at the edge of a cliff, about to make a decision that would change everything. But when Lucas slipped his small hand into hers as they prepared to leave, she realized it might already be too late to turn back. Some connections, she was beginning to understand, were stronger than common sense. 3 days after the restaurant incident, Nora was wiping down tables at the end of her shift when Marcus approached with an envelope. "This came for you," he said, his expression curious. Hand-delivered by a man in a very expensive suit. Nora's heart skipped as she recognized the heavy cream paper with Giovanni Santangelo embossed at the top. Inside was a brief note in elegant handwriting. "Miss Fitzgerald, Lucas has asked about you every day since our dinner. If you're willing, I would like to invite you to our home this Saturday afternoon. Lucas would very much like to show you his room as promised. A car will collect you at 2 p.m. if you accept. G. Santangelo." Below the note was an address in the Hollywood Hills and a phone number. Nora stared at the invitation, her practical mind warring with something deeper. She should decline. Getting further involved with the Santangelo family was dangerous on multiple levels. But the memory of Lucas's hopeful face kept intruding on her rational thoughts. Saturday afternoon found her sitting in the back of a black Mercedes, winding through the exclusive neighborhoods of the Hollywood Hills. The houses grew larger and more isolated as they climbed, until finally they turned through imposing iron gates and up a long driveway. The Santangelo mansion was breathtaking, a modern interpretation of Mediterranean architecture with clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered stunning views of Los Angeles below. It was beautiful but also fortress-like, with security cameras and high walls that spoke of a family that lived with constant awareness of danger. Lucas burst through the front door before the car had fully stopped, his face bright with excitement. "Nora, you came? I knew you would." He threw his arms around her waist, and Nora felt her heart melt a little more. Behind him, Gio appeared in the doorway, looking more relaxed than she had seen him at the restaurant. He was dressed casually in dark jeans and a white button-down shirt, but somehow still managed to look intimidating. "Welcome to our home," he said, his voice warm but careful. The interior of the house was as impressive as the exterior, high ceilings, expensive art, and furniture that probably cost more than Nora made in a year. But despite the luxury, there was something sterile about it, as if it were more showcase than home. "Come on." Lucas grabbed her hand. "I want to show you everything." He dragged her through room after room, chattering excitedly about various pieces of furniture and artwork. But Nora noticed what was missing: family photos, personal touches, any sign that a child actually lived here. It was beautiful but cold, like a museum. Lucas's room was different. Here, finally, was evidence of a 7-year-old's presence. Toys scattered on the floor, drawings taped to the walls, books stacked on every surface. It was the only room in the house that felt truly lived in. "This is my favorite truck," Lucas announced, showing her a large red fire engine. "And this is my art table where I do my drawings. And this is my bed, where I sometimes have bad dreams." The casual mention of nightmares made Nora's chest tighten. What kind of bad dreams? About Mommy, Lucas said matter-of-factly, sitting on his bed and swinging his legs. Sometimes I dream she comes back, but then I wake up and she's still gone. Nora sat beside him, careful not to disturb the stuffed animals arranged on his pillow. Dreams can be confusing sometimes. Do you ever have bad dreams? Lucas asked. Sometimes, Nora admitted. When I was little, I used to dream about my parents after they died. Did the dreams stop? Eventually. But it took time. Lucas nodded solemnly, as if filing away this information for future reference. Daddy has bad dreams too. Sometimes I hear him walking around at night. Before Nora could respond, Joe's voice came from the doorway. Lucas, why don't you show Miss Fitzgerald the garden? The roses are blooming. There was something in his tone that suggested he had heard more of their conversation than he was comfortable with. Lucas jumped up eagerly, but Nora caught the look that passed between father and son, a moment of understanding that spoke of shared pain. The garden was spectacular, with manicured lawns and flower beds that probably required a team of gardeners to maintain. Lucas ran ahead to a swing set tucked under a large oak tree, leaving Nora and Gio walking side by side. He talks to you, Gio observed quietly, about things he doesn't usually discuss. Children often find it easier to talk to people who aren't directly involved in their pain, Nora replied. Sometimes an outside perspective feels safer. Gio was quiet for a moment, watching his son pump his legs on the swing, trying to go higher. He's been having more nightmares lately. The school counselor thinks it's related to abandonment issues. The clinical term sounded strange coming from him, as if he were discussing someone else's child rather than his own son. Have you talked to him about what happened with his mother? Nora asked gently. Joe's jaw tightened. What's to discuss? She left. End of story. But it's not the end of the story for Lucas, Nora pointed out. He's 7 years old and he doesn't understand why his mother would choose to leave him. He's probably blaming himself. He shouldn't, Gio said sharply. It wasn't his fault. But does he know that? Really know it? Gio stopped walking, his hands clenched at his sides. For a moment, Nora thought she had pushed too far. But when he spoke, his voice was raw with an emotion she hadn't expected. I don't know how to talk to him about it, he admitted. I don't know how to explain something I don't understand myself. The vulnerability in his admission caught Nora off guard. This was Giovanni Santangelo, a man who controlled criminal enterprises and commanded fear from dangerous people. But right now he just looked like a lost father who was drowning in his own inadequacy. Maybe you don't need to have all the answers, Nora suggested softly. Maybe you just need to let him know that his feelings are valid and that you're not going anywhere. Gio looked at her sharply. And what makes you think I'm not going anywhere? The question hung between them, loaded with meaning. Nora realized she had made an assumption based on hope rather than evidence. Men in Joe's world lived dangerous lives. There were no guarantees. I suppose I don't know that, she said quietly. But Lucas needs to believe it, even if you can't promise it. Look at me. Lucas called from the swing, interrupting their intense conversation. I'm flying. Both adults turned to watch him, and Nora saw something shift in Joe's expression as he looked at his son. Love, yes, but also fear. The kind of bone-deep terror that came from having something precious that could be lost. He looks like her, Gio said suddenly. Sometimes when he smiles, it's like she's right there. Is that why it's hard to be around him sometimes? Nora asked gently. Joe's silence was answer enough. They spent the rest of the afternoon in the garden, with Lucas showing Nora every flower, every tree, every corner of his world. Gio watched from a distance, occasionally joining their conversations, but mostly observing. Nora could feel his eyes on her, studying her interactions with his son, trying to understand what made her different from all the others who had tried and failed to connect with Lucas. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Lucas finally began to tire. He curled up on a garden bench beside Nora, his head resting against her arm. I wish you could stay for dinner, he said sleepily, and maybe watch a movie with us. I wish I could too, Nora said honestly. But I have to work tonight, at the coffee shop. The evening shift, Lucas sighed. Lucas was quiet for a moment. Do you like working so much? The innocent question hit harder than it should have. I work because I have to, sweetheart. But I like meeting people like you. People like me are probably pretty rare, Lucas said with 7-year-old wisdom. Very rare, Nora agreed, pressing a kiss to the top of his head. When it was time to leave, Lucas hugged her tightly, making her promise to visit again soon. Gio walked her to the car, his expression unreadable. Thank you, he said as the driver held the door open. For today. For seeing him. Thank you for trusting me with him, Nora replied. As the car pulled away, Nora looked back to see father and son standing in the doorway, Joe's hand resting protectively on Lucas's shoulder, both of them watching her leave. The image stayed with her all through her evening shift. A reminder that some connections transcended logic and safety. She was falling for both of them, she realized. The broken little boy who needed love and the dangerous man who was trying so hard to be a good father despite his own damaged past. It was a realization that should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like coming home. 2 weeks later, Nora had settled into an unexpected routine. She visited the Santangelo house twice a week, always in the afternoons when Lucas came home from school. What had started as a simple kindness had evolved into something deeper. She was becoming a constant in Lucas's life, and he was thriving under her attention. But on this particular Tuesday evening, everything changed. Nora was closing up the coffee shop where she worked her morning shifts when her phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something made her answer. Miss Fitzgerald? The voice was tense, unfamiliar. This is Dr. Martinez from Cedars-Sinai. You're listed as an emergency contact for Lucas Santangelo. Nora's blood turned to ice. What happened? Is he okay? He's stable now, but he was brought in about an hour ago. There was an incident at his school. His father is unavailable at the moment. Can you come? Nora didn't remember hanging up or locking the shop. She only remembered running, her heart pounding as she flagged down a taxi and gave the driver the hospital address. The pediatric emergency room was a maze of worried parents and crying children. But Nora spotted Lucas immediately. He was sitting on an examination bed, his small legs dangling over the edge, a large bandage covering his left temple. When he saw her, his face crumpled with relief. Nora! He reached for her, and she gathered him into her arms, careful of his injury. I'm here, baby. I'm here. What happened? Some older kids at school, Lucas whispered against her shoulder. They said mean things about Daddy, about our family. I got mad and pushed one of them, and he pushed me back. I hit my head on the playground equipment. Nora's heart clenched. Lucas was being bullied because of his father's reputation, and he was too young to understand why other children feared and resented him. Where's your daddy? She asked gently. I don't know, Lucas said, his voice small. The school called him, but he didn't come. Tony brought me here, but then he had to leave for work stuff. Dr. Martinez appeared, a kind-faced woman in her 50s. You must be Miss Fitzgerald. Lucas has been asking for you. How is he? Minor concussion, but he'll be fine. We'd like to keep him for observation overnight, just as a precaution. Is there any way to reach his father? Nora pulled out her phone and dialed the number Gio had given her. It went straight to voicemail. She tried again with the same result. His father is in business, she said carefully. Sometimes he's unreachable. Dr. Martinez nodded with the understanding of someone who had dealt with many different family situations. Well, Lucas seems very comfortable with you. Would you be able to stay with him tonight? Of course, Nora said without hesitation. They moved Lucas to a private room, and Nora settled into the uncomfortable chair beside his bed. He fell asleep holding her hand, his small fingers curled around hers like a lifeline. It was nearly midnight when Gio finally appeared. Nora looked up to see him standing in the doorway, still in his business suit but disheveled in a way she had never seen him. His hair was messed up, his tie loosened, and there was something wild in his eyes that spoke of barely controlled panic. How is he? He asked quietly, moving to the other side of Lucas's bed. Sleeping. Minor concussion, but he'll be okay. Nora studied his face. Where were you? Joe's jaw tightened. Business. I couldn't get away. He needed you, Nora said, her voice sharper than she intended. He was hurt and scared and you weren't there. You think I don't know that? Joe's voice was low but intense. You think I wanted to be in a warehouse dealing with a situation that could have gotten us all killed instead of being here with my son? The words hung between them, revealing more than he had probably intended. Nora realized that Joe's absence hadn't been a choice. It had been a necessity born of the dangerous world he inhabited. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I didn't understand. Gio sank into another chair, suddenly looking exhausted. No, I'm sorry. You dropped everything to be here for him when I couldn't. I owe you more than I can ever repay. They sat in silence for a while, watching Lucas sleep. Finally, Gio spoke again. This is why Isabella left, he said quietly. She couldn't handle the uncertainty, never knowing if I'd come home, never knowing if our lives were in danger. She said she couldn't raise a child in this world. But she left the child in this world, Nora pointed out gently. Joe's laugh was bitter. She tried to take him. I stopped her. Maybe I was wrong to do that. Maybe he'd be better off somewhere else, with someone who could give him a normal life. Is that what you really believe? Gio looked at his sleeping son, and Nora saw the love and fear warring in his expression. I believe that loving me is dangerous for anyone. Lucas doesn't see danger when he looks at you, Nora said softly. He sees his father, the person he loves most in the world. And what do you see? Gio asked, his eyes meeting hers across the hospital bed. The question was loaded with meaning, and Nora felt the weight of her answer. What did she see? A dangerous man who controlled criminal enterprises? A devoted father struggling with impossible circumstances? A broken person trying to heal from his own childhood trauma? I see someone who's trying to be better than the hand he was dealt, she said finally. Someone who loves his son enough to question whether that love is enough. Gio stared at her for a long moment. You should walk away, he said quietly. From this. From us. You're a good person, Nora. You deserve a safe, normal life. What if I don't want safe and normal? Nora asked, surprising herself with her honesty. Then you don't understand what you're saying. Don't I? Nora leaned forward. I've been coming to your house for 2 weeks. I've seen how you look at Lucas, how you're trying to be the father you never had. I've seen you struggle with emotions you don't know how to express. You think I don't know what I'm walking into? You know some of it, Gio said. But not all of it. Not the worst of it. Then tell me, Nora challenged. Tell me the worst of it and let me decide for myself. Gio was quiet for so long that Nora thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. My father abandoned me when I was 7 years old, same age Lucas is now. Just left one day and never came back. I swore I'd never do that to a child. But every day I'm terrified that I'm failing him the same way. That my world, my choices, my past, that it's all going to destroy him. And what about your mother? Nora asked gently. Died when I was 12. Overdose. She couldn't handle being alone, couldn't handle the life my father left us with. Joe's hands clenched. I learned early that love doesn't protect you from anything. It just gives you more to lose. The pieces clicked into place for Nora. Joe's emotional distance, his struggle with expressing affection, his terror of letting anyone get too close. It all stemmed from a 7-year-old boy who had been abandoned by the person who was supposed to protect him. You're not your father, she said firmly. How can you be sure? Because your father wouldn't be sitting in this hospital room at midnight, terrified that he'd failed his son. Your father wouldn't care enough to question his own choices. Lucas stirred in his sleep, mumbling something incoherent. Both adults immediately focused on him, but he settled back into peaceful slumber. He asked for you, Gio said quietly. When the school called when he was hurt, he asked for you. He asked for his father too, Nora replied. You're the most important person in his world, Gio. Don't let your fear make you forget that. Gio stood up abruptly, walking to the window that overlooked the city lights. I can't promise you safety, he said without turning around. I can't promise you a normal life or a future without complications. Being part of our world means accepting risks that most people never have to consider. I'm not asking for promises, Nora said. I'm asking for honesty and for you to stop trying to make my choices for me. Gio turned back to face her, and in his eyes she saw something she hadn't seen before: hope, fragile and tentative, but real. You could walk away right now, he said. Lucas would be hurt, but he'd recover. You could go back to your safe life, find someone who doesn't come with a target on his back. I could, Nora agreed. But I won't. Why? Nora looked at Lucas, sleeping peacefully between them, then back at Gio. Because that little boy has already claimed a piece of my heart. And because his father is worth the risk. The silence that followed was charged with possibility and fear in equal measure. Finally, Gio moved back to his chair, reaching across the bed to take Nora's free hand. If you stay, he said quietly, you belong to us. Both of us. And we protect what's ours. Is that a threat or a promise? Nora asked. Both, Gio replied, his thumb tracing circles across her knuckles. In my world, they're often the same thing. As dawn broke over Los Angeles, painting the hospital room in soft golden light, Nora made her choice. She squeezed Joe's hand and settled back in her chair, ready to face whatever came next. She was part of their family now, for better or worse. And looking at the two Santangelo men who had claimed her heart, she couldn't bring herself to regret it. Some risks, she was learning, were worth taking. 3 years later, the sound of laughter echoed through the garden of the Santangelo mansion as Lucas, now 10 years old, chased his younger sister around the rose bushes. At 3, Maria Santangelo was a perfect combination of her parents, her father's dark eyes and determined chin, her mother's auburn hair and gentle spirit. Careful, you two. Nora called from where she sat on the garden bench, one hand resting on her rounded belly. At 6 months pregnant with their second child, she had finally learned to delegate the more energetic activities to others. Gio emerged from the house, loosening his tie as he walked toward his family. At 45, he had aged well, though there were more lines around his eyes. Laugh lines, Nora liked to point out, earned through years of happiness he had never expected to find. How was your day? Nora asked as he settled beside her on the bench. Long, he admitted, pressing a kiss to her temple. But better now. Lucas bounded over, his school uniform grass-stained and his hair messed up. Daddy, guess what happened at school today? What happened? Gio asked, automatically checking his son for injuries, a habit he had never quite broken. Tommy Martinez said his dad could beat up my dad in a fight, Lucas announced proudly. So I told him my dad doesn't need to fight anymore because he's got better things to do, like teaching me to drive and helping Maria with her puzzles and making sure Mama doesn't lift heavy things. Nora and Gio exchanged a look over Lucas's head. In the 3 years since they had married, Gio had gradually transitioned away from the more violent aspects of his business, focusing instead on legitimate enterprises. It hadn't been easy and there were still dangers, but he had kept his promise to give his family the safest life possible within their circumstances. And what did Tommy say to that? Nora asked. He said that sounded pretty cool, actually, Lucas grinned. And then he asked if you could teach his dad how to make pancakes like you do. I think I could manage that, Nora laughed. Maria toddled over, her small arms reaching up for her father. Daddy up. Gio lifted her easily, settling her on his lap. Did you have a good day with Mama? We painted, Maria announced. And read stories. And Mama let me help make cookies. Did you save any for Daddy? Gio asked seriously. Maria giggled and nodded toward the house. In the kitchen. But Lucas ate 3 already. I was quality testing, Lucas protested. Someone has to make sure they're safe for pregnant ladies and little kids. Very responsible of you, Gio said solemnly, though his eyes twinkled with amusement. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in familiar shades of orange and pink, the family settled into comfortable conversation. Lucas told them about his upcoming school play, Maria babbled about her day in the mix of English and Italian she had picked up from her father, and Nora shared news from her weekly calls with her grandmother in Boston. Nana wants to know when she can visit again, Nora said. She's threatening to fly out here by herself if we don't invite her soon. She's welcome anytime, Gio said. Lucas needs to practice his Italian anyway. I know lots of Italian, Lucas protested. Ti amo, papa. Very impressive, Gio agreed, his voice soft with emotion. Even after all these years, hearing his children say they loved him still affected him deeply. Later, after the children were bathed and tucked into bed, Nora and Gio sat on their bedroom balcony, looking out over the city lights. Nora was curled against Joe's side, his arm wrapped protectively around her. Do you ever regret it? Gio asked quietly. Choosing this life? It was a question he asked occasionally, usually when something in his business world reminded him of the risks his family faced because of his past. Never, Nora said firmly. Do you regret letting me stay that night in the hospital? Never, Gio echoed, pressing a kiss to her hair. Though I still think you're crazy for choosing us. Crazy like a fox, Nora murmured. I got the best deal possible, a husband who loves me, children who make me laugh every day, and a life that's never boring. Never boring is one way to put it, Gio said dryly. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the city below. Finally, Nora spoke again. Lucas asked me something today while you were at work. What? He wanted to know if the baby would be a boy or a girl. And when I said we wanted it to be a surprise, he said he hoped it would be a boy so he could teach him how to be brave like his daddy. Joe's arm tightened around her. And if it's a girl? Then he'll teach her how to be strong like her mama, Nora finished with a smile. Either way, he's already planning to be the best big brother in the world. Gio was quiet for a moment, processing the weight of his son's words. He thinks I'm brave. He thinks you're a hero, Nora corrected gently. The man who protects his family and keeps them safe. The father who shows up to every school play and soccer game, who helps with homework and reads bedtime stories. That's the man he sees when he looks at you. Sometimes I still can't believe this is real, Gio admitted. That I get to have this. A family who loves me, children who aren't afraid of me, a wife who sees the best in me even when I can't see it myself. Believe it, Nora said, placing her hand over his heart. This is your life now. Our life. And it's only going to get better. From down the hall came the sound of little feet padding across the floor, followed by Lucas's voice calling softly, Mama? Daddy? Maria had a bad dream. They found both children in Maria's room, Lucas sitting on the edge of her toddler bed, gently patting her back while she sniffled into her stuffed elephant. What's wrong, sweetheart? Nora asked, settling carefully on the other side of the bed. Scary monster, Maria whispered. In the closet. Well, we can't have that, Gio said seriously, moving to the closet and opening the door wide. Let's see. No monsters in here, just clothes and toys. Maybe it's hiding, Maria said uncertainly. You know what? Lucas said importantly. Monsters are afraid of families that love each other. Daddy told me that once. As long as we're all together, no monsters can get us. Is that true, Daddy? Maria asked. Gio knelt beside the bed, his expression solemn. Absolutely true. Love is the strongest magic there is, and this family has more love than any monster could handle. Maria seemed satisfied with this explanation, curling up under her covers with her elephant clutched tightly. Will you stay until I fall asleep? Of course, Nora said, settling into the rocking chair beside the bed. Lucas, do you want to help me sing the lullaby? As their voices blended together in the soft Italian lullaby that Gio had taught them, Maria's eyes grew heavy. Lucas held her hand, and Gio stood guard by the window, watching over all of them. It was a scene that would have seemed impossible just a few years ago. Giovanni Santangelo, feared by enemies and respected by allies, singing lullabies to his children while his pregnant wife rocked gently beside their daughter's bed. But this was what love had done to him, what family had made possible. When Maria was finally asleep, they tucked Lucas back into his own bed, where he proudly showed them the latest addition to his drawing collection, the same stick figure family he had drawn years ago, but now complete. The third figure was clearly Nora, with long hair and a big smile, standing between him and his father. And now there were two more figures, a smaller girl with curly hair and another tiny figure that he had labeled baby. "It's perfect," Nora whispered, kissing his forehead. "Just like our family." "I love you, Mama," Lucas said sleepily. "I love you, Papa. Thank you for making our family complete." As they turned off the lights and closed his door, Gio caught Nora's hand in the hallway. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For seeing him that night in the restaurant. For staying when you should have run. For loving us when we didn't know how to love ourselves." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "For making me a better man than I ever thought I could be." "You did that yourself," Nora said, reaching up to cup his face. "I just reminded you who you already were underneath all that fear." "I love you," Gio said, the words still carrying the wonder of someone who had never expected to say them and mean them completely. "I love you too," Nora replied. "All of you. Forever." As they walked back to their bedroom, past the rooms where their children slept safely, Nora thought about that night 3 years ago when a little boy had broken dishes and her heart in equal measure. She had made a choice then, to see past the chaos to the pain underneath, to offer kindness instead of judgment. That choice had led to this. A love deeper than she had ever imagined possible, a family that had healed each other's wounds, and a future bright with promise. Sometimes, she reflected, the most dangerous risks led to the most beautiful rewards. And sometimes all it took to change everything was one person willing to kneel down beside a broken child and whisper, "I know your heart is hurting." In the end, that was all any of them had ever needed. Someone to see their pain, to stay through the storm, and to believe that love was stronger than fear. They had found that in each other, and it had made all the difference.